On the dark periphery of the small town of Sangraville, a mysterious atmosphere was crowned. In this corner of the world, where the light of lanterns barely penetrated through the heavy curtains of night, hiding its secrets, an ancient legend lived. It was said that there, in a forgotten corner of the forest, dwelt a clan of vampires who, from generation to generation, fed on the blood of the living. Gossip said that these creatures of the night possessed an inhuman beauty that hid their true nature. They are overbearing, cunning, and deadly. Their shadowy eyes are able to peer into the very depths of the human soul. Those who have ever set foot on the territory of Sangraville knew better than to risk wandering in the woods when the sun goes below the horizon. But one day a mysterious stranger named Elizabeth appeared in that town. She was incredibly beautiful, with hair the color of darkness and eyes like the stars of the night sky. The residents of the city couldn't take their eyes off her alluring personality, and someone even said that she was too perfect for this world. Elizabeth was mysterious in her behavior. She always appeared only at dusk, as if the night was her true day. The townspeople began to gossip that she could be a member of the very vampire clan that had been hiding in the forests of Sangraville for centuries. But no one could say that with certainty. One day, on a full moon, strange events began in the city. Residents began to disappear, but they were searched in vain. Strange shadows were seen on the streets, and the air was filled with an indefinite disturbing excitement. Despite the excitement, no one dared to admit that all these events could be related to the legendary vampire clan. One day, at the moment when dusk began to creep across the city, Elizabeth met with one of the townspeople, a young and determined guy named Alexander. He was clumsy and disbelieving, but something in her gaze caught his attention. She told him her story about an ancient clan of vampires who were cursed and tried to find a way out of their captivity. Alexander was dumbfounded, but he was looking for adventures. He decided to help Elizabeth uncover the mystery and solve the puzzle that cast a shadow over his city. Together they plunged into the labyrinths of ancient archives and studied ancient texts, trying to figure out how to unravel the codes left by the vampire clan. With each passing day, Alexander and Elizabeth grew closer to each other, and he began to doubt her connection to the Dark Clan. But the secrets of the city were getting darker and darker, and Alexander realized that some of his neighbors could be members of a vampire clan hiding in the guise of ordinary people. One night, Alexander and Elizabeth decided to perform a ritual that, according to ancient texts, could shed light on what was happening. They were standing in the center of a forgotten church surrounded by a gloomy forest. The faint candlelight illuminated their faces as they began to chant ancient incantations. At that moment, the air was filled with darkness, and shadows began to come to life around. Suddenly, a tall, dark silhouette appeared, the leader of the vampire clan. He looked down at them with a smile full of ominous, mocking satisfaction. "Did you think you could solve our mysteries?" he hissed, and his voice pierced the air. "But you forgot that vampires are cunning creatures. You were just playing our game." Darkness engulfed Alexander and Elizabeth, and they lost consciousness. When they came to their senses, they found themselves in a castle where a vampire clan ruled. They were prisoners surrounded by enemies, and now their lives depended on whether they could find a way out of this gloomy maze. Thus began the darkest chapter in the history of Sangraville, and only time will tell if Alexander and Elizabeth will be able to resist the forces of darkness, or become part of the eternal night that pulled this small town into its embrace. In the castle, where the light flickered only by candlelight, Alexander and Elizabeth felt the darkness surrounding them from all sides. The leader of the vampire clan, the one who suddenly appeared in the church, revealed his true identity to them. He was as old as time, and his eyes sparkled with a predatory light. "You have become a part of our games, little human players," the vampire said ominously, coming closer. "But your curiosity led you to this. Now you are condemned to witness the greatness of our clan." The vampire explained that their lock was the key to their survival. It contains ancient artifacts that ensured the immortality of the vampire clan. They were cursed and had to wander in the shadows forever until they found a way to get rid of the curse. Alexander and Elizabeth were the crucial link in this sinister plan. The nights in the castle were getting darker, and Alexander and Elizabeth were getting closer. They explored mysterious dungeons and forgotten halls, looking for a way out. As their bond grew stronger, they discovered secret records telling about the history of the clan and about previous attempts to get rid of the curse. The vampire guards watched their every move, and the darkness of the castle became more and more palpable. They found out that there is an object that, according to legend, is able to break the curse, the Mirror of Eternity. But where it is, they have not been able to find out. With each passing day, Alexander and Elizabeth became more and more deceived in the network of vampire domination. They felt the darkness begin to penetrate into their souls, but together they gained strength that could be the key to their salvation. One day, on a full moon, they found themselves in a forgotten hall where, according to legend, the Mirror of Eternity is located. But instead there was just an empty podium. The vampire leader emerged from the shadows, grinning. "Did you think you'd find a way out? Naive mortals," he said, looking around the room with his gaze. "But your hopes are just an echo of human stupidity." At that moment, there was a whisper in the room. The walls seemed to speak, and the secret doors opened. There was a mirror in front of Alexander and Elizabeth, shiny and sparkling, as if it contained the very essence of eternity. The vampire furiously disappeared into the shadows, and the castle began to crack, as if its stone walls were shaking with his rage. But winning was only the first step. Alexander and Elizabeth understood that the vampire clan would not give up so easily. They must go through the gloom and darkness to solve the riddle of the curse and put an end to the eternal night that enveloped Sangraville. Alexander and Elizabeth stood in front of the Mirror of Eternity, illuminated by the brilliance of sparkling glass panels. They felt his magical energy enveloping them like a gentle touch of magic. But at that moment, when victory seemed close, a cold howl filled the air, and a vampire leader appeared in front of them. "You seem to forget that you are not alone here," he hissed, his voice shrill in the emptiness of the hall. "This Mirror of Eternity is the key to our immortality. But if you think you can use it against us, you're wrong." The vampire waved his hand, and the magical aura of the mirror began to pulsate, as if the breath of great evil permeated the air. The mirror lit up with a blinding light, throwing sparks of magic in all directions. Alexander and Elizabeth felt that it was absorbing their powers, as if trying to strengthen its magical essence. "Your attempt to break our curse is hopeless," the vampire said, rising above the ground like an ancient spirit of darkness. "You have become our toys, and now your fate depends on us." At that moment, as the Mirror of Eternity absorbed their energy, Alexander and Elizabeth felt their bond grow stronger. Their souls joined in a magical dance, creating a mighty protective barrier. But the vampire smiled, knowing that his power over them would not disappear so easily. The darkness in the castle began to boil, and the Mirror of Eternity flashed with a bright light. At that moment, something unusual happened. All the vampires around began to emit their ominous howls, and their shadows began to dissolve, as if their very essence was being absorbed by an unknown force. Alexander and Elizabeth felt that their connection with the Mirror of Eternity had transformed into something more. Instead of absorbing their powers, the mirror began to reflect the magic of darkness back to its source. The vampire leader looked startled and powerless in front of this unknown magical phenomenon. Stunned by this sudden turn, Alexander and Elizabeth decided to seize the moment. Using their new magical bond, they attacked the vampires using the power of the mirror. The darkness they exorcised began to consume the vampires, freeing their friends and neighbors who had been captured by the clan. In the last act of the struggle, Alexander and Elizabeth were able to exorcise the vampires and break the curse that had held them in power for centuries. The castle disappeared into the darkness, and Sangraville was freed from its dark past. However, the powers they had released remained in there, and Alexander and Elizabeth felt that their connection to magic had not disappeared. They had to figure out how to use this power in the future and what secrets remained to be revealed in this world. But at the same time, in the distance, in another dark corner of the world, something was awakening. The shadow left over from the departed vampire clan began to gather strength. She was striving for a new source of darkness, and only time will tell if someone will be able to stop her on her way back. In the next few years, after fighting the vampire clan, life in Sangraville began to improve. Alexander and Elizabeth became the defenders of the city, using their magical bond to maintain a balance between light and darkness. The townspeople did not forget the dark days, but they found new hope in the face of their defenders. However, when everything seemed calm, strange events began to happen in the city. People began to disappear, and their shadows remained in place, as if their souls had been sucked out of them. Alexander and Elizabeth felt that the darkness was returning, but it was coming from inside the city. While they were investigating the mysterious disappearances, they discovered that there was an ancient altar in the center of the city, which had been forgotten even by the residents themselves. There, in the depths of a dark cave, they encountered the shadow that remained of the defeated vampire clan. This shadow, or remnant of the sinister energy, began to absorb the light and power from Alexander and Elizabeth's magic. Suddenly, a dark figure appeared in front of them, the last surviving member of the vampire clan who escaped their betrayal. He teamed up with the shadow, seeking revenge for the death of his clan. The force they had released had combined into a new threat. The shadow of the vampire has recreated a clan much more powerful than before. She pulled them out of the darkness and gave them a new life. Alexander and Elizabeth realized that they were facing an unknown enemy, powerful and elusive. The shadow, growing in strength, lifted its gaze to the city, and the dark skies of Sangraville began to envelop that evening light again. But at that moment, when hope seemed to be fading, Alexander and Elizabeth realized that the power they had created themselves might be their only salvation. Their connection with magic has not weakened, it has only undergone changes. They decided to use their magic not only to fight the darkness, but also to create light capable of repelling enemies. With this decision, Alexander and Elizabeth rose into the air, surrounded by glowing magic, and directed their might at the shadow of the vampire. The magic of light and darkness collided in a battle that decided the fate of Sangraville. Suddenly, a majestic light pierced the night sky, and the shadow of the vampire disappeared, as if it had melted under the mighty rays of light. The city was freed from darkness, and Alexander and Elizabeth felt the magic find harmony again. But when they landed on the ground, something was wrong. They felt that their powers had become part of something bigger than they could have imagined. The magic they had released took on a new form, leaving them in the dark. Sangraville was once again shrouded in silence, but the mystery of dark magic and light continued to hover in the air. Alexander and Elizabeth realized that their adventures were far from over. A new path had begun, and they were walking forward, not knowing what awaited them in the dark future that was just beginning to unfold.